when 24-year-old pediatric nurse Elena Vasquez threw herself between a vicious attacker and a wounded police dog. She never imagined that her 10 stab wounds would reveal a secret that would bring 200 of America's most elite warriors to their knees. Hey there, my beautiful family and friends. Welcome back. If you're ready to settle in for another unforgettable story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hearing from you, no matter where you are in the world, always makes my day. And hey, if you enjoy this one, stay tuned, because there are always more powerful stories on the way, and you definitely don't want to miss them. Before we begin, do me a favor, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone you love. You never know whose heart this story might touch. Now, let me take a moment to speak into your life. I pray that whatever burden you're carrying, you find peace that passes all understanding. I pray that in the quiet moments when no one sees your tears, God sees you and comforts you. I pray for healing over every broken piece of your heart and strength to rise again no matter how many times life has knocked you down. May joy find its way back to you, even if you've forgotten what it feels like. May your faith be reignited, your spirit lifted, and may love, real, deep, unconditional love, surround you wherever you are right now. You're not forgotten, you're not invisible, and you're not alone. This community is your safe space, and this story, like all the others, is here to remind you just how powerful your journey truly is. Now take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's story. Have you ever helped someone without expecting anything back? The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Children's Hospital cast harsh shadows across Elena Vasquez's tired face as she checked her phone for the third time in 10 minutes. 11:47 p.m. Her double shift was finally ending, but the $8.47 past due notice from her landlord felt heavier in her scrub's pocket than the stethoscope around her neck. At 24, Elena had already learned that life rarely offered second chances to people like her. The daughter of a single mother who cleaned office buildings at night, she'd worked her way through nursing school with a combination of scholarships, student loans that still haunted her credit score, and shifts at a 24-hour diner that left her smelling like grease and exhaustion. "Elena, you heading out?" called Dr. Martinez from behind the nurse's station, his voice carrying the same bone-deep weariness that seemed to permeate everyone who worked the night shift in pediatric intensive care. "Finally," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her dark eyes. She'd perfected that smile over years of pretending everything was fine when it decidedly wasn't. "Mrs. Chen's little boy is stable, and I've updated all the charts for the morning shift." Dr. Martinez nodded, but Elena caught the way his gaze lingered on her face. She knew she looked as exhausted as she felt. The past 3 months had been particularly brutal. Her mother's diabetes medication had doubled in price, her ancient Honda had needed a new transmission, and the pediatric ward had been understaffed, meaning more shifts and longer hours for everyone. But Elena never complained. Not when 7-year-old Marcus, she'd learned to love that name despite everything, asked her to read him another story because the chemo made it hard for him to sleep. Not when baby Sophia's parents couldn't afford to stay in the nearby hotel and slept in uncomfortable chairs beside their daughter's crib. Not when her own stomach growled because she'd given her lunch money to Mrs. Patterson, whose grandson was fighting leukemia and whose fixed income couldn't stretch to cover parking fees and cafeteria meals. "Get some rest," Dr. Martinez said, though they both knew rest was a luxury neither of them could afford. Elena gathered her things, a worn leather purse her mother had given her for graduation, a water bottle with a crack down one side, and a small notebook where she kept track of which families needed extra attention. She'd started the notebook during her first week, when she realized that healing wasn't just about medication and medical procedures. Sometimes it was about remembering that Mrs. Kim liked her coffee with 2 sugars, or that teenage patient Jake responded better when you talked to him about basketball instead of his treatment. The hospital's night security guard, Frank, waved as she passed his desk. "Another long one, Elena?" "They're all long ones, Frank. But the kids are worth it." And she meant it. Despite the financial stress that kept her awake at night, despite the student loans that seemed to grow rather than shrink with each payment, despite the constant worry about her mother's health, Elena had never regretted becoming a pediatric nurse. There was something about the resilience of children, their ability to find joy even in the darkest circumstances, that reminded her why compassion mattered. The October air bit through her thin jacket as she stepped into the hospital parking lot. Her breath formed small clouds in the darkness, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her shoulders. The parking lot was nearly empty at this hour. Just a few cars belonging to the skeleton crew that kept the hospital running through the night. Elena's Honda sat under a flickering streetlight, looking as tired as she felt. She'd named it Hope during her first year of nursing school, back when she still believed that positive thinking could overcome practical problems like engine trouble and rust spots. Now, 3 years later, Hope was held together by determination and prayer, much like Elena herself. She was fishing for her keys when she heard it, a low whimper that seemed to come from the shadows near the hospital's emergency entrance. Elena paused, her nurse's instincts immediately alert. Working in pediatrics had taught her to recognize the sounds of pain and distress, whether they came from humans or animals. The whimper came again, weaker this time. Elena forgot about her exhaustion, forgot about the rent notice in her pocket, forgot about everything except the fact that something was hurt and needed help. She followed the sound toward a cluster of bushes near the emergency room's side entrance, her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. What she found made her heart clench with a familiar mixture of anger and compassion. A German shepherd lay on its side, its dark fur matted with blood. The dog wore a tactical vest with K9 unit, emblazoned across the side, and Elena could see a name tag that read Rex. One of his legs was bent at an unnatural angle, and shallow cuts covered his muzzle and flanks. But his eyes, intelligent brown eyes that seemed far too human, tracked her movement with a mixture of wariness and desperate hope. "Oh, sweetheart," Elena whispered, immediately dropping to her knees beside the injured animal. "What happened to you?" Rex's tail gave the faintest wag, as if he recognized the tone of someone who wanted to help. Elena had always been good with animals, another trait she'd inherited from her mother, who used to bring home stray cats despite their tiny apartment's no-pets policy. She could see that Rex was in bad shape. The cuts looked deliberate, and the way he favored his left side suggested internal injuries. Someone had hurt this dog intentionally, and the thought made Elena's chest tight with rage. "It's okay, boy," she murmured, slowly extending her hand for Rex to smell. "I'm going to help you." Elena pulled out her phone to call animal control, but Rex whimpered again, and she could see his breathing becoming more labored. He didn't have time to wait for official help. Making a decision that would change everything, Elena carefully slipped her arms under the injured dog. Rex was heavier than she'd expected, and lifting him sent sharp pains through her back and shoulders. But Elena had spent 3 years moving patients, and she knew how to distribute weight safely. More importantly, she knew what it felt like to be hurt and alone, waiting for someone to care enough to help. "Come on, Rex," she whispered as she carried him toward the emergency entrance. "Let's get you fixed up." The automatic doors slid open, and Elena stepped into the bright lights of the emergency room, a wounded police dog in her arms and no idea that her simple act of compassion had been witnessed by someone who would soon change her life forever. From the shadows of the parking lot, a figure in a dark hoodie watched Elena disappear into the hospital. The man's weathered face was grim as he pulled out a phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. "It's done," he said quietly when the call connected. "The target's been neutralized. But sir, there's something else you need to know." The emergency room's bright lights felt harsh after the darkness of the parking lot, but Elena barely noticed. Rex's breathing had become more shallow during the short walk, and she could feel his heartbeat fluttering against her chest like a trapped bird. "I need help," Elena called out as she entered the ER, her voice cutting through the typical late-night hospital sounds. The hum of machines, the distant murmur of conversations, the soft squeak of sneakers on linoleum. Dr. Sarah Chun, the night shift emergency physician, looked up from a chart she was reviewing. Her expression shifted from mild curiosity to concern as she took in the sight of Elena holding the bloodied German shepherd. "Elena? What?" "I found him in the parking lot," Elena said, her words coming fast. "He's a police K9. Someone hurt him badly, cuts all over, possible internal bleeding, and I think his leg is broken." Dr. Chin hesitated. "Elena, you know we can't treat animals here. This is a human hospital. You need to call." "He's dying," Elena interrupted, and there was something in her voice that made Dr. Chin stop mid-sentence. It was the same tone Elena used when advocating for her young patients, the voice that had convinced more than one doctor to try a different approach or spend a few extra minutes explaining a procedure to worried parents. Elena looked down at Rex, whose brown eyes were fixed on her face with an expression that seemed almost grateful. "Look at him, Dr. Chun. Really look at him." This isn't just any dog. He's a working dog, a partner to some police officer who's probably out there right now wondering where his partner is. And even if he wasn't, Elena's voice softened. He's hurt, and he's scared, and he needs help. Isn't that what we swore to do? Help those who can't help themselves. The emergency room had grown quiet. A few nurses had gathered nearby, drawn by the unusual situation. Elena could see the conflict on Dr. Chen's face, the practical concerns of hospital policy warring with the basic human instinct to heal. The liability issues alone, Dr. Chen began. I'll take full responsibility, Elena said immediately. Put it all on me. If there are consequences, I'll face them. But I can't just let him die when I know we have the skills and equipment to save him. Rex whimpered softly, as if he understood the conversation happening above him. Elena adjusted her grip, feeling the dog's weight in her tired arms, and made a decision that surprised even her. If you can't officially help, Elena said quietly, then I'll do it myself. I've assisted in enough procedures, I know basic wound care, and I can at least stabilize him until I can get him to a veterinary hospital. She turned toward one of the empty examination rooms, her jaw set with determination. Elena had always been stubborn. Her mother called it her blessing and curse. But this felt different. This felt like something she had to do, not just for Rex, but for some deeper reason she couldn't quite name. Elena, wait. Dr. Chen's voice stopped her at the doorway. The doctor looked around the emergency room, taking in the faces of the nurses who had gathered. Elena could see the moment when Dr. Chen's medical training overrode her administrative concerns. Room 3, Dr. Chen said with a sigh. And Elena? This never happened officially. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you. The next hour passed in a blur of careful, methodical work. Elena had assisted in hundreds of procedures during her nursing career, but she'd never been the primary caregiver for a patient who couldn't tell her where it hurt. She had to rely on her training, her instincts, and Rex's responses to guide her. Dr. Chen provided quiet guidance, officially, just observing, while Elena cleaned and sutured the cuts on Rex's muzzle and flanks. The wounds were deep and deliberate. Someone had used a knife, and Elena felt her anger flare each time she discovered a new injury. Whoever did this wanted him to suffer, Elena murmured as she worked, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. These aren't defensive wounds or accident injuries. Someone tortured this dog. Rex lay still throughout the procedure, occasionally lifting his head to look at Elena with those intelligent brown eyes. It was as if he understood that she was trying to help, and he was doing his best to cooperate. The broken leg was more complicated. Elena had to improvise a splint using supplies from the hospital's orthopedic department, carefully immobilizing the fracture while Rex watched her every move. You're being so brave, Elena whispered to him as she worked. Braver than half my human patience. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Elena finally stepped back, her scrubs stained with blood and her hands cramping from the delicate work. Rex was stable, his breathing had improved, the bleeding had stopped, and the makeshift splint would hold until he could receive proper veterinary care. He needs antibiotics, Elena said to Dr. Chen, who had stayed throughout the entire procedure. And pain medication. I can calculate the dosages based on his weight. Dr. Chen nodded. I'll write the prescriptions. Unofficially, of course. Elena sank into a chair beside the examination table, suddenly feeling the full weight of her exhaustion. She'd been awake for nearly 20 hours, had worked a double shift, and had just performed emergency surgery on a dog in a human hospital. By all rights, she should have been falling asleep on her feet. Instead, she found herself gently stroking Rex's head, watching his chest rise and fall with steady breaths. Why did you do it? Dr. Chen asked quietly. You could lose your job over this. The hospital administration, the licensing board, if they find out. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the soft fur behind Rex's ears. Do you remember why you became a doctor? She finally asked. To help people. Exactly. To help. Elena looked up at Dr. Chen. Not to help humans specifically, or to help people who can pay, or to help people who fit into neat administrative categories. Just to help. When I found him out there, bleeding and scared and alone, I didn't see a policy violation or a liability issue. I saw someone who needed help, and I had the ability to provide it. Rex's tail gave a weak wag, as if he approved of her explanation. Besides, Elena added with a tired smile, my mom always said that how you treat those who can't repay you says everything about who you really are. Rex can't pay me back, Can't recommend me to his friends, can't even say thank you. But he needed help, and I could give it. That's enough. Dr. Chen was quiet for a moment. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She is. She's also diabetic and uninsured, which is why I work double shifts and eat ramen for dinner most nights. But she taught me that being poor doesn't mean you can't be rich in the ways that matter. From the hallway came the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy boots that suggested someone in a hurry. Elena looked up as a police officer appeared in the doorway, his face a mixture of relief and concern. Rex, the officer, his name tag read Martinez, rushed to the examination table. Oh God, boy, what happened to you? Rex's tail wagged more vigorously at the sight of his partner, and Elena felt her heart warm at the obvious bond between them. Are you the one who found him? Officer Martinez asked Elena, his voice thick with emotion. In the parking lot, Elena confirmed. He was in pretty bad shape, but he's stable now. The cuts have been cleaned and sutured, and his leg is splinted. He'll need to see a veterinarian for follow-up care, but he should be okay. Officer Martinez's eyes filled with tears. I've been looking for him for hours. We were responding to a domestic violence call, and the suspect got away. Rex chased him into an alley, and when I caught up, he shook his head. There was blood, but no Rex. I thought I'd lost him. Elena watched the reunion between officer and dog, feeling a familiar warmth in her chest. This was why she'd become a nurse, not for the paycheck, which was modest, or the prestige, which was minimal, but for moments like this. Moments when her skills and compassion could make a real difference in someone's life. Thank you, Officer Martinez said, turning to Elena with tears still in his eyes. I don't know how to repay you for this. You don't need to repay me, Elena said simply. Just take good care of him. What Elena didn't know was that their conversation was being overheard by someone who had been waiting in the hospital corridor for the past hour. Someone whose presence would soon turn her simple act of kindness into something that would change her life forever. 3 days after saving Rex, Elena was back to her normal routine as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She arrived at St. Mary's for another double shift, her Honda coughing and sputtering in the parking lot like an old man with emphysema. The $8.47 rent notice had been joined by a $3.12 electric bill and a student loan payment reminder that made her stomach clench. Elena, you look exhausted, said Maria Santos, the day shift nurse who was preparing to leave. Are you eating enough? Elena forced that practiced smile again. I'm fine, Maria. Just tired. How's little Tommy doing? It was a deflection, and they both knew it. Elena had perfected the art of redirecting conversations away from her own struggles and toward the patients who needed their attention. Tommy Rodriguez was a 6-year-old with cystic fibrosis whose parents worked 3 jobs between them and still couldn't afford the parking fees to visit every day. His oxygen levels are better, Maria reported, but her concerned gaze remained on Elena's face. Elena, when's the last time you had a real meal? Not vending machine food or whatever you can grab from the cafeteria. Elena couldn't remember. Yesterday, she'd given her lunch money to Mrs. Patterson again. The grandmother whose grandson was fighting leukemia had been crying in the family waiting room because she couldn't afford both parking and food. The day before, Elena had spotted Mr. Kim sleeping in his car in the parking lot because he couldn't afford a hotel room while his daughter recovered from surgery. I'm managing, Elena said, which wasn't exactly a lie. She was managing, barely, but managing nonetheless. The truth was, Elena's act of kindness with Rex had cost her more than just sleep. Dr. Chen had quietly covered the medical supplies they'd used, but Elena had insisted on paying for Rex's antibiotics and pain medication out of her own pocket. It was money she couldn't afford to spend, but the thought of Rex suffering because of financial constraints had been unbearable. As Elena made her rounds that evening, she carried the same worn notebook where she kept track of which families needed extra attention. Tonight's entries included: Mrs. Kim likes coffee with 2 sugars, worried about missing work. Jake Morrison, room 314. Responds better to basketball talk, scared about upcoming surgery. Baby Sophia's parents. Sleeping in chairs again, bring extra blankets. Tommy Rodriguez. Parents can't visit tonight, read extra story. What Elena didn't know was that her notebook had been photographed 3 days earlier by someone who had been watching her every move since the night she saved Rex. The man in the dark hoodie, who went by the name Ghost in certain circles, had initially come to the hospital for a very different purpose. His mission had been simple: eliminate a witness who could identify his employer. Rex had seen too much during that domestic violence call, and certain people couldn't afford to have a police dog's keen senses lead investigators in the wrong direction. But Ghost's carefully planned operation had been derailed by a 24-year-old nurse who threw herself between him and his target without a second thought. Now, 3 days later, Ghost sat in a rental car across from Elena's apartment building, reading a detailed report about her life. The information painted a picture that made him increasingly uncomfortable with his original mission. Elena Maria Vasquez, 24, pediatric nurse at St. Mary's Children's Hospital. Mother, Carmen Vasquez, 52, diabetic, works as night janitor. Father, unknown. Student loan debt, $47,000. Credit score, 542. Monthly income, $2,800. Monthly expenses, $3,200. The numbers told a story of someone living paycheck to paycheck, but Ghost had observed enough to know that Elena's financial struggles didn't define her character. Over the past 3 days, he'd watched her give her lunch money to struggling families, stay late to comfort frightened children, and treat every patient with the same gentle care regardless of their ability to pay. Ghost's phone buzzed with a text from his employer. Status report. Has the witness been eliminated? Ghost stared at the message for a long moment. In 15 years of military service and 5 years of private contracting, he'd never hesitated to complete a mission. But something about Elena's selfless actions had shaken something loose inside him. Something he'd thought was buried permanently after too many years of violence and moral compromise. He typed back, complications. Need more time. The response was immediate, no complications. Complete the mission. Ghost looked up at Elena's apartment building, a rundown complex where the hallway lights flickered and the elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked permanently affixed. Elena lived on the 4th floor, and Ghost had watched her climb those stairs every day, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion, but her step never faltering. Instead of responding to his employer's message, Ghost made a different call. Admiral Morrison? It's Ghost. I need to speak with you about a situation. Admiral James Morrison had been Ghost's commanding officer during his Navy SEAL days, and one of the few people Ghost still trusted completely. The conversation that followed would set in motion events that Elena couldn't possibly imagine. Meanwhile, Elena was finishing her shift, completely unaware that her life was being discussed by people she'd never met. She was in room 314 with Jake Morrison, the teenage basketball fan who was scheduled for surgery the next morning. I'm scared, Elena, Jake admitted quietly. His parents had gone home to get some rest, and the night shift was always when patients' fears seemed to grow larger. Elena pulled a chair close to his bed. Tell me what scares you most. What if I don't wake up? What if the surgery doesn't work? What if? Jake's voice trailed off, but Elena could hear all the unspoken fears that kept teenage patients awake at night. You know what I think about when I'm scared? Elena asked, settling into the chair despite the fact that she had 6 other patients to check on. Jake shook his head. I think about all the people who've been brave before me. Not famous people or superheroes, but ordinary people who faced scary situations and found the courage to keep going. Like my mom, who came to this country with nothing and worked 3 jobs to put herself through English classes. Or like you, actually. Me? I'm not brave. I'm terrified. Elena smiled. Jake, you've been fighting this illness for 8 months. You've endured treatments that would make grown adults cry. You've kept your sense of humor even when you felt awful. You've worried more about your parents' stress than your own pain. If that's not brave, I don't know what is. Jake was quiet for a moment. Will you be here when I wake up? Elena's shift would technically end before Jake's surgery was finished, but she didn't hesitate. I'll be here. It was a promise that would cost her another night's sleep and another day's pay. But Elena had learned long ago that some things mattered more than money. As she sat with Jake until he finally drifted off to sleep, she had no idea that her simple act of staying with a frightened teenager was being observed by someone who was beginning to understand why Admiral Morrison had sounded so interested when Ghost described the nurse who'd saved a police dog's life. Have you ever stayed with someone who was scared, even when you had your own problems to worry about? The next morning, Elena was still at the hospital when Jake was wheeled into surgery. She'd caught a few hours of sleep in the family waiting room, and her back ached from the uncomfortable chairs, but she'd kept her promise. She was there when Jake woke up, groggy but smiling, and she was there when his parents arrived with tears of relief in their eyes. Thank you, Jake's mother whispered to Elena. He told us you stayed all night. Elena just squeezed the woman's hand. "He's a special kid. You should be proud." As Elena finally headed home that morning, she passed the hospital parking lot where she'd found Rex 3 days earlier. She paused for a moment, wondering how the German Shepherd was recovering, hoping that Officer Martinez was taking good care of him. She had no way of knowing that Rex was not only recovering beautifully, but that his story, and hers, had reached the ears of some very powerful people who were about to take a much closer interest in the pediatric nurse who'd risked everything to save a wounded police dog. Elena climbed into her Honda, which started on the 3rd try, and drove home to her small apartment where she would eat a peanut butter sandwich for breakfast and try to figure out how to stretch her paycheck until the next one arrived. Behind her, Ghost sat in his rental car, watching her leave. His phone buzzed again with another message from his employer, but this time he turned it off without reading it. Some missions, he was beginning to realize, were more complicated than they appeared. Ghost had been trained to observe targets for weeks without being detected, but watching Elena Vasquez was unlike any surveillance mission he'd ever undertaken. Most targets had predictable patterns. They went to work, came home, lived lives that could be mapped and anticipated. Elena's life had patterns too, but they were patterns of selflessness that defied every tactical manual Ghost had ever studied. It was Thursday morning when Ghost decided to test her character more directly. He'd spent the previous night researching Elena's route to work, her financial situation, and her daily habits. What he'd discovered was a young woman who walked 45 minutes to work each way to save on gas money, who bought generic groceries and clipped coupons like her mother had taught her, and who somehow still found ways to help others despite having almost nothing herself. Ghost positioned himself at the bus stop Elena passed every morning, disguised as a homeless veteran. It wasn't much of a disguise. The worn military jacket was his own, and the haunted look in his eyes was real enough. He'd seen too much, done too much, to ever completely shake the shadows that followed him. Elena appeared right on schedule at 6:47 a.m., walking briskly despite the early morning chill. She wore the same thin jacket she'd had on the night she saved Rex, and Ghost could see her breath forming small clouds in the October air. He'd expected her to walk past like most people did, maybe a sympathetic glance, perhaps a mumbled sorry, if he asked for help. Instead, Elena stopped. "Are you okay?" she asked, and Ghost was struck by the genuine concern in her voice. This wasn't performative kindness for the benefit of observers. There was no one else around to impress. "Just cold," Ghost replied, staying in character. "Haven't eaten in a couple days." Elena's face immediately showed the internal struggle Ghost had been counting on. He could see her calculating, the money in her wallet versus the bills she needed to pay, her own needs versus the needs of a stranger. "Wait here," she said finally, and Ghost watched her walk to the nearby convenience store. She emerged 5 minutes later with a coffee, a breakfast sandwich, and a small bag that she handed to Ghost without ceremony. "The coffee's black. I didn't know how you like it," she said. "And there are some granola bars in the bag for later." Ghost looked down at the items in his hands, then back at Elena's face. "I can't pay you back." "I'm not asking you to," Elena replied simply. "Just take care of yourself, okay?" As she walked away, Ghost opened the bag and found not just granola bars, but also a pair of warm socks still in their packaging and a $20 bill with a note that read, "For whatever you need most. E." Ghost sat there for a long moment, staring at the note. $20 might not seem like much to most people, but Ghost had seen Elena's financial records. $20 was her lunch money for 4 days. $20 was the difference between paying her electric bill on time or getting a late fee. And she'd given it to a stranger without hesitation. What drives someone to give when they have so little themselves? That afternoon, Ghost tried a different test. He called St. Mary's Hospital, claiming to be a social worker investigating reports of a nurse who was allegedly stealing medication. He described Elena perfectly and waited to see how her colleagues would respond. "Elena Vasquez?" The nurse who answered the phone sounded genuinely shocked. "Are you sure you have the right person? Elena's the most honest person I know. She once walked back into a store to pay for a candy bar she'd accidentally taken without paying." "We have to investigate all reports," Ghost said, maintaining his cover. "Well, you're wasting your time with Elena. That girl would give you the shirt off her back if you needed it. Last week she gave her lunch money to a patient's grandmother who couldn't afford parking. The week before that, she stayed 3 hours past her shift to sit with a scared kid whose parents couldn't make it to the hospital. If Elena's stealing anything, it's probably her own time to give to other people. Ghost hung up, but the conversation stayed with him. He'd conducted dozens of background checks in his career, but he'd never encountered someone whose character was so consistently vouched for by everyone who knew them. The next test came Friday evening. Ghost had learned that Elena always stopped at the same small grocery store on her way home from work. Not because it was convenient, but because it was owned by an elderly Korean couple who struggled with English, and Elena had been helping them with their bookkeeping for free. Ghost arrived at the store first, posing as a customer who was growing increasingly agitated about the slow service. Mr. Park, the elderly owner, was clearly flustered as he tried to process Ghost's purchase while dealing with a malfunctioning cash register. "This is ridiculous," Ghost said loudly, playing the role of an impatient customer. "I don't have all day for this." Other customers began to look uncomfortable, and Mr. Park's hands shook as he tried to fix the register. Ghost was about to escalate the situation when Elena walked through the door. She took in the scene immediately, the frustrated customer, the embarrassed store owner, the uncomfortable tension filling the small space. "Mr. Park, is everything okay?" Elena asked, moving directly to the counter. "Register is broken," Mr. Park said quietly, his accent thick with stress. "This man is angry." Elena looked at Ghost with a calm expression that somehow made him feel ashamed of his performance. "Sir, I know it's frustrating when things don't work properly, but Mr. Park is doing his best. These machines break down sometimes." She turned to Mr. Park. "Would you like me to take a look at it? Sometimes it just needs to be reset." Within 2 minutes, Elena had the register working again. She'd clearly done this before. As the line of customers began moving again, Ghost watched Elena help Mr. Park with the backlog of transactions, her movements efficient and kind. "Thank you, Elena," Mr. Park said when the rush had cleared. "You are Angel." "Just a nurse with too much experience with broken machines," Elena replied with a smile. "How's Mrs. Park feeling? Is her arthritis better?" Ghost listened to Elena inquire about the elderly couple's health, their grandchildren, their concerns about the store's finances. It was clear that she knew these people not as convenient shopkeepers, but as human beings whose lives mattered to her. When Elena finally made her own purchase, a small bag of rice, some generic pasta, and a single apple, Ghost noticed that Mr. Park tried to refuse her money. "Elena, you help us so much. Please, no charge." "Mr. Park, we've talked about this," Elena said gently but firmly. "You have a business to run. I pay like everyone else." As Elena left the store, Ghost followed at a distance. His phone had been buzzing with increasingly urgent messages from his employer, but he'd been ignoring them. Each test he'd devised had only confirmed what he'd observed that first night. Elena Vasquez was exactly who she appeared to be. That evening, Ghost sat in his rental car outside Elena's apartment building and made a decision that would have shocked his former commanding officers. He called Admiral Morrison again. "Admiral, it's Ghost. I need to tell you about the nurse. The one who saved the police dog." "Yes, sir. But it's more than that." Ghost found himself struggling to put Elena's character into words. "Sir, in 15 years of military service and 5 years of contracting, I've never encountered anyone like her. She's—" He paused, searching for the right phrase. "She's what we used to fight for, sir." Before everything got complicated, Admiral Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "Ghost, are you compromised?" "No, sir. I'm clear-headed for the first time in years." Ghost looked up at Elena's apartment window, where a soft light glowed behind thin curtains. "This woman represents everything good about humanity, and I've been ordered to eliminate her because she saved a dog's life. That's not a mission I can complete." "Who gave you this order?" Ghost provided the details, and Admiral Morrison's response was immediate and decisive. "Stand down, Ghost. Protect the nurse. I'm making some calls." As Ghost ended the call, he had no idea that Admiral Morrison was about to contact 200 of the most elite warriors in the world. Men who had sworn an oath to protect the innocent, and who were about to learn about a pediatric nurse whose simple acts of kindness had reminded them all why they'd chosen to serve. Have you ever met someone whose goodness made you want to be better yourself? Elena, meanwhile, was upstairs in her small apartment, eating her simple dinner and reviewing her notebook of patient notes, completely unaware that her life was about to change in ways she could never imagine. Elena's apartment was a study in making the most of very little. The one-bedroom space was clean but sparse. A second-hand couch with a carefully mended tier, a small dining table that doubled as a desk, and walls decorated with children's drawings from her patients rather than expensive artwork. The refrigerator was covered with thank you cards from families, photos of kids who'd beaten their illnesses, and a single picture of Elena with her mother at her nursing school graduation. It was Saturday morning, and Elena was doing what she did every weekend, balancing her checkbook with the precision of someone who couldn't afford a single mathematical error. The numbers, as always, didn't add up in her favor. Rent, $8.47, past due electric, $3.12 student loans, $4.20 mom's medication, $1.80 groceries, $6.60 gas, $40. Total, $1, $8.59 income after taxes, $1.680. Elena stared at the deficit, $1.79, and felt the familiar knot in her stomach. She'd been juggling these numbers for 3 years, always managing to find a way to make it work, but each month seemed to get harder. Her phone rang, interrupting her financial calculations. The caller ID showed Mama, and Elena's face immediately brightened. Hola, Mama. ¿Cómo estás? Mija, I'm fine, but I'm worried about you. Carmen Vasquez's voice carried the same gentle concern that had shaped Elena's entire worldview. Mrs. Rodriguez from downstairs said she saw you walking to work again yesterday. Is your car broken? Elena glanced toward the window where her Honda sat in the parking lot. The car ran, technically, but gas money was a luxury she couldn't afford this week. It's fine, Mama. I just like the exercise. Carmen's knowing sigh came through the phone. Elena Maria, you are just like your father, too proud to ask for help and too stubborn to admit when you're struggling. Elena rarely talked about her father, but her mother's mention of him brought back a flood of memories. Miguel Vasquez had been a paramedic who died in the line of duty when Elena was 12. She remembered him coming home from shifts, exhausted but always willing to help neighbors with medical questions, to check on elderly Mrs. Chun next door, to teach Elena how to properly bandage a wound or take someone's pulse. Papa always said that helping others was the rent we pay for living on this earth, Elena said quietly. See, he did. And he also said that accepting help when you need it doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Carmen's voice grew softer. Mija, I know you're struggling. I can hear it in your voice. Let me help you. Mama, you're already working 2 jobs to pay for your medication. I'm not taking money from you. Then let me do what I can. I'll make you some food to take to work. Mama. Elena's voice was firm but loving. I'm okay. Really. I have everything I need. It wasn't entirely true, but Elena had learned early that sometimes love meant protecting the people you cared about from worrying about problems they couldn't solve. After ending the call, Elena sat in the quiet of her apartment and let herself remember the day that had shaped everything about who she'd become. She was 16, working her first job at a fast food restaurant to help her mother pay bills. It was a particularly busy Saturday, and Elena was exhausted from pulling a double shift when an elderly man collapsed in the dining area. While other customers stood around unsure what to do, Elena had immediately dropped to her knees beside him, using the CPR training her father had taught her years earlier. The man survived. His family later told Elena that he was a retired teacher who had spent 40 years helping kids from low-income families get into college. As Elena performed chest compressions and waited for the ambulance, she'd realized that this was what her father had meant about paying rent for living on Earth. That night, she decided to become a nurse. The path hadn't been easy. Elena had worked multiple jobs through high school, earned scholarships based on her grades in community service, and taken out loans that still haunted her credit score. But every difficult day had been worth it for moments like the one with Rex, or sitting with scared teenagers like Jake, or helping families navigate the most frightening experiences of their lives. What moment in your life showed you what you were meant to do? Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Admiral James Morrison was making phone calls that would change Elena's life forever. Morrison had served as a Navy SEAL for 22 years before transitioning to a role coordinating special operations. In that time, he'd worked with some of the most elite warriors in the world, men who had volunteered for the most dangerous missions, who had sacrificed everything in service to their country, and who understood the true meaning of honor. The story Ghost had told him about Elena Vasquez had struck Morrison in a way that few things had in recent years. In an era when cynicism seemed to dominate the headlines, when acts of genuine selflessness were rare enough to make national news, Elena represented something that Morrison and his men had sworn to protect, the very best of humanity. Morrison's first call was to Master Chief Petty Officer David Reaper Johnson, who now ran a private security firm staffed entirely by former Special Operations personnel. "Reaper, I need you to listen to something, and I need you to pass it along to every SEAL you trust." Morrison told Elena's story. The struggling nurse who had risked her career to save a wounded police dog, who gave her lunch money to families in need, who stayed past her shifts to comfort frightened children. He told Reaper about ghost surveillance, about the tests that had only confirmed Elena's extraordinary character. "Admiral, what do you need from us?" Reaper's voice carried the same immediate readiness that had made him legendary in the teams. "I need you to understand that this woman represents everything we fought for. She's living the values we claim to hold: courage, honor, selflessness. Not in a war zone, but in a pediatric hospital where she makes $16 an hour and can barely pay her rent." Morrison's second call was to Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Phoenix Martinez, who now worked with a nonprofit organization that helped veterans transition to civilian life. "Phoenix, I'm about to tell you about someone who's going to restore your faith in humanity." His third call was to Commander Michael Titan Thompson, who had left the military to become a successful businessman but still maintained connections throughout the Special Operations community. "Titan, remember why we joined the teams? Remember what we swore to protect? I found her. She's a 24-year-old nurse in California, and she's everything we hoped America could be." Each person Morrison called made their own calls. The story of Elena Vasquez began to spread through a network of warriors who had seen the worst of humanity and were hungry for a reminder that goodness still existed in the world. By Sunday evening, Morrison had contacted 47 former Special Operations personnel. Each of them had the same response: "What can we do to help?" Morrison's plan was simple but unprecedented. These warriors had spent their careers protecting freedom and democracy on foreign battlefields. Now they had a chance to protect something equally precious: a woman whose daily acts of kindness proved that the values they'd fought for were alive and well in the heart of an ordinary American hero. Back in her apartment, Elena was preparing for another week of double shifts, completely unaware that her story was being shared among some of the most elite warriors in the world. She reviewed her patient notes, set out her scrubs for the morning, and said a small prayer that her Honda would start one more time. As she drifted off to sleep, Elena had no idea that 200 Navy SEALs were about to do something that would make headlines around the world. All because a pediatric nurse had chosen to save a wounded dog's life. The forces that would transform Elena's world were already in motion, set in motion by her own simple acts of compassion and the recognition by America's finest warriors that true heroism wasn't always found on battlefields. Sometimes it was found in hospital corridors, where a young woman with almost nothing gave everything she had to help others. Monday morning brought the kind of chaos that made Elena grateful for her profession, even when her Honda had required 10 minutes of coaxing to start. The pediatric ward was busier than usual. 3 new admissions over the weekend, including a 7-year-old car accident victim and twin babies born prematurely. Elena moved through her rounds with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to find calm in the storm. Room 308 held Marcus Chun, the 7-year-old who'd been asking for her specifically since his admission. Room 315 housed the premature twins, whose parents looked like they hadn't slept in days. And room 314 still held Jake Morrison, who was recovering well from his surgery but struggling with the emotional aftermath. "Elena," Marcus called out as she entered his room. "Did you bring the book?" Elena smiled, pulling a worn copy of Where the Red Fern Grows from her bag. She'd bought it at a used bookstore with money she couldn't afford to spend, but Marcus had been asking about it for weeks, and the hospital's limited library didn't have a copy. Chapter 7, right? Elena settled into the chair beside his bed, the same chair where she'd spent countless hours reading to patients over the past 3 years. As she read, Elena noticed Marcus's parents in the hallway, talking quietly with Dr. Martinez. She could see the stress in their posture, the way they held each other like people trying to stay strong in the face of overwhelming circumstances. Elena had seen that look thousands of times, the expression of parents who were watching their child suffer and feeling helpless to fix it. After finishing the chapter, Elena found Marcus's mother, Lisa Chun, crying quietly in the family waiting room. "Mrs. Chun, is everything okay?" Lisa looked up, her eyes red with exhaustion and worry. "The insurance company is fighting some of the treatments Dr. Martinez recommended. They're saying Marcus's therapy isn't medically necessary." Her voice broke on the last words. Elena felt the familiar surge of anger that came whenever bureaucracy interfered with patient care. She'd seen too many families forced to choose between their child's health and financial ruin, too many necessary treatments denied by people who had never looked into a sick child's eyes. What kind of therapy? Elena asked, sitting beside Lisa. Physical therapy to help with his mobility after the accident. The insurance company says he can do exercises at home, but Dr. Martinez says he needs specialized equipment and professional guidance. Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking, Mrs. Chun, what if I told you there might be another way? Over the next hour, Elena made 3 phone calls. The first was to her friend Maria, who worked at a physical therapy clinic and owed Elena a favor from when she'd helped Maria's daughter through a difficult hospitalization. The second was to Dr. Rodriguez, a physical therapist who volunteered at the community center where Elena had done her clinical rotations. The third was to her former nursing school professor, who maintained connections throughout the medical community. By the end of her shift, Elena had arranged for Marcus to receive free physical therapy sessions at the community center, with transportation provided by a volunteer driver network that Elena had helped organize during her first year as a nurse. How did you do this? Lisa Chin asked, tears of gratitude replacing tears of despair. Sometimes it's not about having money, Elena replied. Sometimes it's about knowing people who care. What Elena didn't mention was that she'd also quietly arranged to cover the gas money for Marcus's transportation to therapy sessions. It would come out of her already stretched budget, but Elena had learned long ago that some expenses were investments in hope. Have you ever found a way to help someone when the system failed them? Meanwhile, the network Admiral Morrison had activated was growing exponentially. What had started as 47 phone calls had become a movement that was spreading through military communities across the country. Master Chief Reaper Johnson had shared Elena's story during a gathering of former SEALs in Virginia Beach. The response had been immediate and unanimous. These warriors wanted to help. Gentlemen, Reaper had said to the assembled group, we've spent our careers protecting freedom overseas. Here's a chance to protect something just as important at home, a woman who embodies every value we swore to defend. The story resonated because it was authentic. These men had seen enough manufactured heroism and political theater to recognize the real thing when they encountered it. Elena's actions weren't performed for cameras or recognition. They were the daily choices of someone who had dedicated her life to serving others. Lieutenant Colonel Phoenix Martinez had taken the story to her network of female veterans, many of whom had faced their own struggles transitioning to civilian life. The idea of supporting a woman who was quietly changing the world through compassion struck a deep chord. She's doing what we all hoped we'd do when we got out, Phoenix told her group. She's making a difference in her community, one person at a time. Commander Titan Thompson had approached the story from a different angle. As a successful businessman, he understood the power of organized effort and strategic planning. He'd begun coordinating with other veteran-owned businesses, creating a network of resources that could be mobilized quickly and effectively. By Tuesday evening, the informal network had grown to include 127 former special operations personnel from all branches of the military. They called themselves Elena's Angels, though Elena herself had no idea they existed. The group had established secure communication channels and begun gathering intelligence, not for combat operations, but for the most important mission of their post-military careers, supporting a nurse who had reminded them why they'd chosen to serve in the first place. Back at St. Mary's, Elena was finishing another double shift, completely unaware that her life was being discussed in secure chat rooms and encrypted phone calls across the country. She was focused on more immediate concerns. Jake Morrison was being discharged the next day, the premature twins were showing signs of improvement, and Marcus Chun had smiled for the first time since his accident. As Elena prepared to leave the hospital, she stopped by the NICU to check on the twins one more time. Their parents, Maria and Carlos Santos, were maintaining their vigil beside the incubators. Any change? Elena asked softly. Baby gained 2 ounces, Maria whispered, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the fragile progress. The doctor says that's good. Elena looked at the tiny babies, each no bigger than her hand, fighting for every breath. She thought about their parents, who had been living on vending machine food and sleeping in uncomfortable chairs for a week. Have you 2 eaten today? Elena asked. Carlos shook his head. We don't want to leave them. Elena understood. She'd seen this countless times. Parents so focused on their children's survival that they forgot to take care of themselves. Without saying anything, Elena left the NICU and returned 20 minutes later with sandwiches, coffee, and a bag of snacks from the cafeteria. "Elena, we can't afford," Maria began. "It's taken care of," Elena said simply, which was true. She'd paid for it herself, adding another small expense to her already strained budget. As Elena finally headed home that night, she had no idea that her simple act of buying dinner for worried parents had been observed by someone who immediately reported it to a growing network of warriors who were becoming more impressed with her character every day. Ghost, who had been maintaining his protective surveillance, sent a message to Admiral Morrison. "Target continues to demonstrate exceptional character. Today she arranged free medical care for a patient, covered transportation costs from her own funds, and bought dinner for parents who couldn't leave their premature babies. Recommend immediate escalation of support operations." Morrison's response was swift, agreed. "Initiate Phase 2. It's time Elena learned she's not alone anymore. Elena drove home in her sputtering Honda, tired but satisfied with another day of making small differences in people's lives. She had no idea that 200 of America's most elite warriors were about to make a very large difference in hers. Wednesday morning started like any other day, but by noon, Elena's world was crumbling around her. It began with a phone call during her lunch break, a call she almost didn't answer because she was sitting with Mrs. Patterson, whose grandson had taken a turn for the worse overnight. "Miss Vasquez? This is David Chun from Westfield Property Management. I'm calling about your overdue rent." Elena's stomach dropped. She'd been hoping to have another week to figure out the money. "Mr. Chun, I know I'm behind, but—" "Miss Vasquez, you're now 30 days past due. We're initiating eviction proceedings. You have 72 hours to pay the full amount owed, including late fees, or you'll need to vacate the premises." The number hit Elena like a physical blow, $1,247. The original rent plus late fees and penalties had grown beyond anything she could possibly manage. "Please," Elena said quietly, aware that Mrs. Patterson was pretending not to listen. "I'm a nurse. I work double shifts. I just need a little more time. I'm sorry, Miss Vasquez. The decision has been made. 72 hours. Elena hung up and stared at her phone, feeling the familiar sensation of the world tilting sideways. She'd been juggling financial crises for 3 years, but this felt different. This felt final. "Mija, what's wrong?" Mrs. Patterson asked gently. Elena forced a smile. "Nothing I can't handle, Mrs. Patterson. How are you feeling about Tommy's treatment today?" It was a deflection, but Mrs. Patterson saw right through it. The elderly woman had been watching Elena for weeks, had seen the way she gave away her lunch money and stayed late without pay, had noticed the worn shoes and the careful way Elena counted change in the cafeteria. "Elena, you take care of everyone else. Who takes care of you?" The question hit harder than Elena expected. She excused herself and went to the bathroom, where she allowed herself exactly 2 minutes to cry before washing her face and returning to work. The afternoon brought more bad news. Elena's Honda finally gave up completely in the hospital parking lot, making a grinding noise that sounded expensive and final. When she called the mechanic, his estimate made her laugh bitterly. $1,800 for a transmission replacement on a car worth maybe $500. "Just tow it to the junkyard," Elena told him. "I can't afford to fix it." As she hung up, Elena realized she was now facing homelessness and unemployment simultaneously. Without a car, she couldn't get to work. Without work, she couldn't pay rent. Without rent money, she'd be living on the street. What would you do if everything fell apart at once? Elena called her mother, but Carmen was at work and couldn't answer. She considered calling in sick for her evening shift, but the pediatric ward was already understaffed, and Elena couldn't bring herself to abandon her patients when they needed her. So she walked 4.5 miles from the parking lot to her apartment, then 4.5 miles back to the hospital for her evening shift. By the time she arrived, her feet were blistered and her legs ached, but she was there. "Elena, you look exhausted," said Dr. Chin, who was covering the evening shift. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Elena lied, because admitting the truth would mean breaking down completely, and her patients needed her to be strong. The evening shift was particularly challenging. Marcus Chin was scheduled for another surgery the next morning, and his parents were barely holding themselves together. The premature twins had developed complications that required constant monitoring. Jake Morrison had been readmitted with an infection, and his teenage bravado was cracking under the weight of fear. Elena moved through her duties with mechanical precision, but inside, she was drowning. Every smile felt forced, every reassurance felt hollow. How could she tell families that everything would be okay when her own life was falling apart? It was nearly midnight when Elena found herself in the supply closet, finally allowing the tears to come. She'd held it together for 18 hours, but the weight of everything, the eviction notice, the broken car, the impossible financial situation, crashed over her like a wave. She was crying quietly when she heard a soft knock on the door. "Elena? It's Jake. Are you okay?" Elena quickly wiped her eyes and opened the door. Jake Morrison stood in the hallway in his hospital gown, looking concerned despite his own medical struggles. "I'm fine, Jake. You should be in bed. You've been taking care of everyone else all day," Jake said with the surprising wisdom that sometimes came from teenagers who'd faced their own mortality. "But you look like you need someone to take care of you." Elena felt fresh tears threatening. "Jake, my mom always says that the people who take care of everyone else usually forget to take care of themselves," Jake continued. "She also says that asking for help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." Elena stared at this 17-year-old boy who was offering her comfort while fighting his own battle with illness. In that moment, she realized that Jake was giving her the same gift she'd been trying to give her patients, the reminder that they weren't alone. "Thank you," Elena whispered. "Elena, whatever's wrong, it's going to be okay. I don't know how I know that, but I do. Sometimes good things happen to good people. It just takes a while." As Jake returned to his room, Elena stood in the hallway feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not because her problems had been solved, but because she'd been reminded that kindness was a circle, and sometimes it came back when you needed it most. What Elena didn't know was that Jake's words were more prophetic than either of them could imagine. At that very moment, 200 Navy SEALs were finalizing plans for an operation that would change her life forever. Admiral Morrison had received Ghost's latest report about Elena's financial crisis, and the response from the SEAL network had been immediate and overwhelming. These warriors had faced impossible odds in combat, but they'd never encountered anything that moved them quite like the story of a nurse who was losing everything because she couldn't stop helping others. "Gentlemen," Morrison said during an encrypted conference call that included SEAL team leaders from across the country, "Elena Vasquez is facing eviction in 60 hours. Her car is dead, and she's walking 9 miles a day to get to work because she won't abandon her patients. This is our moment." Master Chief Reaper Johnson's voice came through clearly. "Admiral, we're ready. All teams are in position." Lieutenant Colonel Phoenix Martinez added, "The media contacts are standing by. This is going to be bigger than anything we've done." Commander Titan Thompson concluded, "Sir, we've got enough resources mobilized to change this woman's life permanently. Elena's angels are ready to deploy." As Elena finished her shift and began the long walk home, she had no idea that the most elite warriors in America were about to execute the most important mission of their post-military careers. A mission to prove that heroes who serve others deserve to be served in return. The next 24 hours would transform Elena Vasquez from a struggling nurse into a symbol of hope for an entire nation, all because she'd chosen to save a wounded dog and never stopped choosing to help others, even when she had nothing left to give. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of exhaustion that comes from walking 9 miles on blistered feet and sleeping 3 hours on a couch you're about to lose. Elena's eviction notice now read 48 hours remaining, and she'd spent the night staring at her phone, trying to find the courage to call her mother and explain that she was about to be homeless. She couldn't do it. Carmen Vasquez had sacrificed too much for her daughter's education, had worked too many double shifts cleaning office buildings, had gone without her own medications to help Elena through nursing school. Elena would sleep in her car before she'd burden her mother with this crisis. Except she didn't have a car anymore. Elena was preparing for another long walk to the hospital when someone knocked on her apartment door. She opened it to find a man in his 50s wearing a military-style jacket, his posture unmistakably that of someone accustomed to command. "Miss Vasquez? I'm Admiral James Morrison, United States Navy, retired. I wonder if we could talk." Elena blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, Admiral, but I think you have the wrong person. I don't know anyone in the military." "Actually, you do. You know someone who goes by the name Ghost, though you've never been formally introduced." Morrison's expression was serious but kind. "May I come in? What I have to tell you is going to change your life." Elena hesitated, but something about Morrison's bearing, the quiet authority, the genuine concern in his eyes, made her step aside. Morrison entered her sparse apartment and took in the details. The carefully mended furniture, the thank you cards from patients covering the refrigerator, the eviction notice on the kitchen counter. His expression softened further. "Miss Vasquez, 6 days ago, you saved the life of a police dog named Rex." "Yes, but how did you?" "You were being watched that night. By someone who had been sent to hurt Rex, to eliminate him as a witness to a crime." Morrison's words hit Elena like a physical blow. "The man watching you goes by Ghost. He's a former Navy SEAL who had been contracted to kill that dog." Elena sank into her second-hand chair, her mind reeling. Someone wanted to kill Rex? But why? Rex had witnessed something that certain people didn't want investigated. Ghost was hired to make sure Rex couldn't lead police to evidence that would expose them. Morrison sat across from her, his voice gentle but clear. "But when Ghost saw you throw yourself between him and Rex, when he watched you risk your career and spend your own money to save a wounded animal, something changed." Elena's hands were shaking. "You're saying someone was going to kill Rex, and I accidentally stopped them?" "You didn't accidentally do anything, Miss Vasquez. You made a choice. A choice that revealed your character so clearly that it changed the mind of a man who had never failed to complete a mission." Morrison leaned forward. "Ghost called me that night. He told me about a nurse who embodied everything we'd sworn to protect during our military service." "I don't understand. Why are you telling me this?" Morrison smiled for the first time since entering her apartment. "Because Ghost's story about you has spread through a network of warriors who recognize true heroism when they see it. Miss Vasquez, you have 200 Navy SEALs who consider you their hero." Elena stared at him. "That's impossible." "Is it? You've spent 3 years putting others before yourself. You give your lunch money to struggling families. You stay past your shifts to comfort frightened children. You arrange free medical care for patients whose insurance companies fail them. You walk 9 miles a day to work because you won't abandon your patients, even when your own life is falling apart." Elena felt tears starting. "How do you know all that?" "Because Ghost has been watching you, protecting you, documenting every act of kindness. And every report he sent made us more convinced that you represent the very best of what we fought to defend." Morrison's voice grew stronger. "Miss Vasquez, we've spent our careers serving our country overseas. Now we want to serve someone who serves others every single day. Have you ever discovered that people were watching out for you when you thought you were alone?" Morrison pulled out his phone and showed Elena a photograph that made her gasp. It was a picture of Rex, fully recovered, wearing his police vest and standing beside Officer Martinez. But surrounding them were dozens of men and women in military uniforms, all holding signs that read, "Thank you, Elena." "This was taken yesterday at Naval Base Coronado," Morrison explained. "Word about you has spread through the entire Special Operations community. These warriors wanted Rex to know that the woman who saved his life has an army of protectors now." Elena was crying openly now. "I don't understand why you're doing this. Because in a world that often seems dark, you're a light. Because you prove that heroism isn't about combat or medals. It's about choosing to help others when you have every reason to help yourself first." Morrison stood up. "Miss Vasquez, you're about to learn what happens when 200 Navy SEALs decide to take care of someone who's been taking care of everyone else." Morrison walked to the window and made a gesture Elena couldn't see. Within seconds, she heard the sound of vehicles pulling up outside her apartment building. "What's happening?" Elena asked, moving to the window. What she saw made her legs weak. The parking lot was filling with pickup trucks, SUVs, and motorcycles. Men and women in military-style clothing were getting out of vehicles, all of them moving with the purposeful coordination of people accustomed to working as a team. "Miss Vasquez," Morrison said quietly, "meet Elena's angels." Elena watched in amazement as the group began unloading equipment from their vehicles. She could see boxes, tools, what looked like construction materials, and more people arriving every minute. "Admiral Morrison, what are they doing?" "They're about to show you what happens when America's finest warriors decide to take care of one of their own." Morrison's smile was proud. "Miss Vasquez, you're not losing your apartment. You're getting a new life." A knock at the door interrupted them. Morrison opened it to reveal a woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone accustomed to leadership. "Admiral, Lieutenant Colonel Phoenix Martinez reporting. The teams are in position. Elena, meet Phoenix. She's coordinated logistics for operations in 12 countries. Today, she's coordinating an operation to make sure you never have to worry about rent again. Elena felt like she was dreaming. I don't understand what's happening. Phoenix smiled warmly. Elena, we've been planning this for 3 days. We have teams handling your housing situation, your transportation needs, your student loans, and your mother's medical expenses. We have media crews standing by to tell your story to the world. And we have 200 warriors who consider it an honor to serve someone who serves others. But why? Elena whispered. Morrison answered. Because you saved Rex. Because you give your lunch money to struggling families. Because you stay late to comfort scared kids. Because you walk 9 miles to work rather than abandon your patients. Because you represent everything good about humanity, and we've spent our careers protecting what's good. Elena looked out the window again, watching as more vehicles arrived and more people joined the organized effort taking place in her parking lot. Miss Vasquez, Morrison said gently, your days of struggling alone are over. Elena's angels are here, and we're not leaving until we've taken care of the woman who's been taking care of everyone else. As Elena watched 200 of America's most elite warriors mobilize to change her life, she finally understood that sometimes, when you spend your life helping others, the universe finds a way to help you back. What happened next would be talked about for years to come, shared on social media millions of times, and remembered as the day America's warriors proved that true strength lies in lifting others up. Elena watched from her window as the parking lot transformed into a command center that would have impressed any military strategist. Master Chief Reaper Johnson had established a coordination point near the building entrance, with teams receiving assignments and dispersing with the efficiency of a special operations mission. Elena, Phoenix said gently, we need you to come outside. There are some people who want to meet you. Elena's legs felt unsteady as she walked down the 4 flights of stairs she'd climbed every day for 2 years. But when she stepped outside, the sight that greeted her made her stop breathing entirely. 200 men and women stood in formation in the parking lot. They wore everything from military uniforms to civilian clothes, but they all shared the same bearing, the unmistakable posture of warriors. And they were all looking at her with expressions of respect and admiration. Elena Vasquez, Admiral Morrison's voice carried across the parking lot. I present to you Elena's Angels, 200 Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Marine Force Recon, and Air Force Pararescue personnel who consider it an honor to serve someone who serves others. The formation began to move, and Elena realized they were forming a corridor leading from her apartment building to the street. As she walked between them, each warrior saluted her, not the casual acknowledgement civilians sometimes received, but the crisp, respectful salute reserved for those who had earned their deepest respect. Elena was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. At the end of the corridor stood a figure she recognized, Ghost, no longer hiding in shadows but standing proudly in the daylight. Miss Vasquez, Ghost said, his voice thick with emotion. 6 days ago, I was sent to kill a police dog. Instead, I watched you risk everything to save him. That moment changed my life, and it's about to change yours. Ghost gestured toward the street, where Elena saw something that made her gasp. A brand new Honda CR-V sat at the curb, its silver paint gleaming in the morning sun. A red ribbon was tied around it, and the keys dangled from Ghost's hand. This is from all of us, Ghost said. You'll never walk to work again. But the car was just the beginning. Phoenix stepped forward with a folder in her hands. Elena, we've taken care of your housing situation. Your landlord has been paid in full, including 6 months in advance. But more than that, Phoenix smiled. We've purchased this entire apartment building. You're not just keeping your apartment. You're now the property manager, with a salary that will ensure you never have to choose between helping others and paying your bills. Elena's knees buckled, and 2 SEALs immediately stepped forward to steady her. I can't accept this, she whispered. It's too much. Elena, Admiral Morrison said firmly, you've spent 3 years giving everything you had to help others. Today we're giving back. And we're not done. Commander Titan Thompson approached with another folder. Elena, your student loans have been paid in full. Every penny. You're debt-free as of this morning. Elena was shaking now, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their generosity. Why are you doing this? Because you saved Rex, said a voice from the crowd. Elena turned to see Officer Martinez approaching with Rex at his side. The German shepherd looked healthy and strong, his tail wagging as he recognized Elena. Because you give your lunch money to families who can't afford parking, said another voice. Elena saw Mrs. Patterson emerging from the crowd, tears streaming down her face. "Because you stayed with me when I was scared," said Jake Morrison, who had somehow been discharged from the hospital to be here. "Because you helped us when the insurance company said no," said Marcus Chen's parents, standing with their son who was walking with the help of the physical therapy Elena had arranged. Elena realized that her patients and their families were scattered throughout the crowd of warriors. The people she'd helped over the past 3 years had somehow been contacted and brought here to witness this moment. "Elena," Admiral Morrison said, his voice carrying over the crowd, "you thought you were just doing your job, but you were doing something much more important. You were proving that heroism exists in everyday acts of kindness. You were showing us what we fought to protect." Phoenix stepped forward again. "Elena, there's one more thing. We've established the Elena Vasquez Foundation for Healthcare Heroes. It will provide financial support for medical professionals who go above and beyond for their patients. You'll be the director, with a salary that reflects the value of what you do." Elena was sobbing now, but they were tears of joy mixed with disbelief. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep being exactly who you are," Ghost said quietly. "Say you'll keep helping others. Say you'll remember that kindness matters, and that sometimes the universe finds a way to reward those who give without expecting anything in return." Elena looked around at the faces surrounding her, warriors who had seen combat, families she'd helped through their darkest moments, colleagues who had watched her sacrifice for others day after day. She saw Rex, healthy and strong, his intelligent eyes fixed on her with what looked like gratitude. She saw her mother, Carmen, who had somehow been brought here and was crying with pride. "I don't understand how this is real," Elena whispered. "It's real because you made it real," Admiral Morrison replied. "Every act of kindness, every sacrifice, every moment you chose to help others instead of helping yourself, it all led to this moment. You planted seeds of compassion, Elena. Today, you're seeing the harvest." The crowd began to move again, and Elena realized they were forming a new formation. Not military precision this time, but something warmer. They were creating a circle around her, a circle of protection and support that would last far beyond this single day. "Elena," Phoenix said, "we want you to know that this isn't just about money or cars or apartments. This is about family. You now have 200 brothers and sisters who will always have your back. You'll never face a crisis alone again." Elena looked around the circle, seeing faces that had been strangers an hour ago, but now felt like family. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the struggles, the sacrifices, the moments when she'd wondered if kindness really mattered in a world that often seemed indifferent to suffering. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying to every person in the circle. "Thank you for reminding me that good things do happen to people who try to do good things." Admiral Morrison stepped forward one final time. "Elena, we have one last surprise. Rex's story, and yours, is going to be featured on national television tonight. The whole country is going to learn about the nurse who saved a police dog and the warriors who decided to save her back. Your story is going to inspire millions of people to look for ways to help others." Elena looked down at Rex, who had somehow made his way to her side. She knelt and wrapped her arms around the German shepherd who had started this incredible journey. "Thank you, boy," she whispered into his fur. "Thank you for showing me that sometimes when you help others, the whole world helps you back." As the crowd began to disperse, each warrior stopping to shake Elena's hand or offer a word of encouragement, Elena realized that her life had been transformed in ways she was still trying to understand. She had a new car, a secure home, financial freedom, and a job that would allow her to help other healthcare heroes. But more than that, she had learned something that would stay with her forever. Kindness is never wasted, compassion is never forgotten, and sometimes the smallest acts of love can change the world in ways you never imagined. 6 months later, Elena would stand before Congress, testifying about the need for better support for healthcare workers. A year later, the Elena Vasquez Foundation would have helped over 1,000 medical professionals facing financial crises. 2 years later, Elena's Angels would have grown into a national network of veterans supporting healthcare heroes across the country. But on this Thursday morning, as Elena drove her new car to work for the first time, she was simply a nurse who had learned that when you spend your life lifting others up, sometimes the universe conspires to lift you up in return. She arrived at St. Mary's Children's Hospital with tears of joy still drying on her cheeks, ready to continue doing what she'd always done, caring for others with everything she had. The only difference was that now she had everything she needed to keep giving. As Elena walked through the hospital doors, her phone buzzed with a text from Admiral Morrison. "Elena, you've shown us what true heroism looks like. Now show the world. There are more people out there who need to know that kindness matters." Elena smiled, thinking about all the patients waiting for her, all the families who needed comfort, all the small acts of kindness she could perform now that she no longer had to worry about her own survival. What act of kindness could you do today? The question that had started as a simple thought had become Elena's mission. And as she began another day of caring for others, she knew that the circle of kindness that had transformed her life was just beginning to expand. Sometimes heroes wear uniforms and carry weapons. Sometimes they wear scrubs and carry stethoscopes. And sometimes, when those two kinds of heroes recognize each other, magic happens. Elena Vasquez had saved a police dog's life. In return, 200 Navy SEALs had saved hers. But the real miracle wasn't in the saving. It was in the reminder that in a world that often seems dark, there are still people who choose light, still warriors who fight for what's good, and still ordinary heroes whose extraordinary kindness can change everything. The story of Elena and Rex would be told for generations, but its real power lay not in its ending, but in its beginning, in the simple choice to help someone who needed help without expecting anything in return. That choice, made by a tired nurse in a hospital parking lot, had reminded 200 warriors why they'd chosen to serve. And their response had reminded the world that heroism comes in many forms, but it always begins with the decision to put others first. Elena's story was far from over. It was just beginning. This story reminds us that everyday heroes walk among us, in hospitals, schools, restaurants, and communities everywhere. They may not wear capes or carry weapons, but they carry something more powerful: the choice to help others, even when they're struggling themselves. Elena Vasquez represents all the unsung heroes who make our world better through simple acts of kindness. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe finds a way to reward those who give without expecting anything in return. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If this touched your heart, then you're going to love the next one. It's just as powerful and even more intriguing than you can imagine. So don't stop here. Click the video showing on your screen right now and continue the journey. I'll be waiting for you on the other side of that story. See you there.